Today we talk about what PGT really does and what it doesn't do.
I'm Dr. Mark Amols, and this is Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.
When you hear about PGT, also known as preimplantation genetic testing, you often think of it as this magic tool that makes your embryos better. Like somehow if you do PGT, you're upgrading your embryos to first class. But in reality, that's not how it works. PGT does not improve your embryos. It doesn't turn a poor quality embryo into a good one. What it does do is it helps us sort them so we can transfer the best one first. And that's a subtle but incredibly important difference. Now, I'm not a chocolate fan, but I'm going to do my best at this analogy. But let's say you got a box of chocolates. And let's say some of them are caramel, some of them have coconut, yummy. Some of those weird ones with, the jelly inside them, sorry if you like those, it's kind of weird. And now you're trying to pick the best one. But the problem is you can't tell from the outside and you've lost instructions. So that little box that says what each one is, you don't know. Think of PGT like cutting into each chocolate and opening it to see what's inside before you eat it. In the end, cutting the chocolate doesn't change what's in the chocolate. It just helps you eat the ones you like first. Now this may sound very simple and easy to understand, but really the big takeaway here, and the part that I really want you to remember, is if you transfer all your embryos, the chance of having a baby is pretty much the same whether you use PGT or not. Now, I'm not saying that each transfer will be the same. If you have 5 embryos, and 2 of those embryos are genetically normal, and 3 are abnormal, doing PGT is going to let you sort them to know which one is the best 2 to put back first and avoid putting back some of the abnormal ones. However, if you don't have that information and you just transfer an embryo one at a time, eventually you will get to those 2 embryos, whether it's on the first transfer, second, or even on the 5th. The difference is that with PGT, you're likely to get there faster because you're picking the embryo with the highest chance of success first. Or in the scenario with chocolates, you can get to that coconut first before the jelly. Now keep in mind, it doesn't mean that your chances are better. It might give you the one that has the higher likelihood of having success, but it still doesn't guarantee success. This means of those 5 embryos, if 2 of them are genetically normal, whether you do PGT or not, you may still not end up with a live birth, even though 2 of those embryos were genetically normal. What we do know is that the abnormal embryos had a very, very low chance of ever becoming a live birth, and you're able to avoid those. So then, no one should use PGT, right? When is it really helpful then? Well, not exactly. PGT is incredibly useful, but in more scenarios where there's a higher chance of having aneuploid embryos. If you are 38 years old or older, the risk of a chromosomal abnormal embryo increases significantly. So PGT can help avoid failed transfers or miscarriages by identifying the healthy embryos first. Now, it doesn't mean before age 38 that it can't be useful. It's just saying when you base it off of the idea of the risk of having an aneuploid embryo, after age 38, more than 50% of the embryos are abnormal. So there's a clear benefit to getting to the euploid embryo first instead of having to go through multiple transfers that fail. It would even be cost effective because you would have to spend money doing multiple transfers to get to that live birth. But there are a couple less obvious but really valuable ways PGT helps in other ways. One is diagnostic clarity. When the transfer doesn't work with an untested embryo, the first assumption is always, well, it's probably abnormal. But when you transfer a euploid embryo that didn't implant, you know the issue isn't going to be the genetics of the embryo. Now, the embryo can still have problems, but at least it's not the genetics. And what that does is it forces us to look at other potential problems, like the uterus, the timing, or other factors. And so you're able to speed up the journey to success because instead of wasting cycles guessing, you're able to narrow the issue earlier. Sometimes it can also be cost effective. So if you're at a clinic that has a very high cost of embryo transfer, then PGT may be useful. If it costs $8,000 to do a transfer, but the PGT testing only costs $3,200, then even one failed transfer would make PGT cost effective. We see this a lot when people are using surrogates. It's very expensive to use a surrogate. So you don't want to waste money trying transfers that won't work. So it's pretty common now to do PGT testing, so that way when you put the embryo in the surrogate, you have the highest chance of success, which will reduce your overall cost of using a surrogate. Another situation is for people who are banking embryos for the future. Let's say you're 37 and you want to freeze embryos, but you don't even want to use them until you're like 41 or 42. Or maybe you want to build a big family, so you know that you need to get all the embryos now. Well, if you don't test them, you really don't know what you have. It would be like the situation of getting a box of chocolates and you learn that the Willy Wonka factory is closing down and you are never going to get another box of chocolates. And you're not sure if your box has those coconut chocolates and you're freaking out. If you don't look at the chocolates now, you don't know if you need to buy another box of chocolates. And potentially, if you wait too long and you finally open the box and find you don't have them, it's too late. The factory has shut down. So by doing PGT in this situation, you're able to tell which chocolates are caramel, which are coconut, and which are not worth saving, such as the jellies. Additionally, it's somewhat empowering. When the time or future fertility might be limited, knowing what you have in the freezer isn't just helpful, it's empowering. There's another part of fertility that we don't talk a lot about, and that's the emotional toll of going through fertility. Even today, I had a patient who knows that I have more kids, and they were asking me, should they do another retrieval or do a transfer with our last embryo from the other clinic? And they've had 2 failed transfers. What I told them is having a pregnancy helps reduce a ton of stress. And so I lean towards the transfer because going through another retrieval isn't going to help reduce the stress at this moment. She's young enough that she can wait. But once she has that baby in her hand, a lot of that stress goes away. But each one of those failures causes stress and keeps giving hopelessness towards the future of having a child. Even when IVF is fully covered, as it is in countries like France and Belgium, many patients stop treatment after failed transfers. And not because of the cost, but because of the emotional exhaustion. In France, a study found that 26% of couples discontinued IVF after just one unsuccessful cycle, despite not having to pay for anything. In Belgium, another study showed that 50% of women cited psychological burden as the main reason for stopping treatment. Each failed transfer isn't just a medical event, it's a loss. It's hope deferred. And that can be devastating. This is where PGT can play a crucial role. By helping us identify the most viable embryos up front, PGT can reduce the number of unsuccessful transfers, fewer failures mean fewer emotional setbacks. And that can help patients stay the course to be able to have success. So after that, then you would think everyone should do PGT. Well, not necessary. But there are plenty of times when PGT isn't needed. It's not unreasonable to do it, but it's really not needed. For example, if you're under 35 and you have lots of high quality embryos and no history of miscarriage, you might just be fine transferring one at a time without testing. And if you're planning on using all your embryos anyways, your cumulative pregnancy rate will be the same. It just takes a little longer to get there. As we started this podcast, PGT does not make your embryos better. It just increases the chances of picking the best one in the beginning. From a cumulative standpoint, if you have a normal embryo, you will eventually get to it. So, if you're not doing PGT, don't worry. You're not missing out on some magic enhancement. Your embryos are what they are. And if you're patient and you're willing to transfer one at a time, you'll likely reach the same destination. It just might take a little bit longer. Now, I'm not saying not to do PGT. as you probably heard me say in other podcasts, if it's free, I'd recommend everyone to do it because I do think there are some benefits. But I also don't want people to do it when they really don't need it. The chances of actually having a baby with a chromosomal abnormality by not testing embryos is very small, which I talked about in a prior podcast. So when you're younger, doing PGT to prevent a child with Down syndrome really isn't necessary. Now, it's easy for me to say that because I haven't had a child with a chromosomal abnormality. But if you're someone who did, that might be very fearful for you, or maybe you had a family member. So again, it's not unreasonable to do PGT. But the reason you shouldn't do PGT is because you think it makes the embryos better. That it does not. So let's recap. PGT doesn't fix your embryos. It just helps us find the best ones faster. It doesn't improve the number of embryos that are normal out of the cohort. It just improves your per transfer success rate. And that if you end up transferring all your embryos, the cumulative chances of pregnancy is going to be the same as if you just transferred the PGT only embryos that were euploid. But the difference is you reduce the failed attempts because you have tested the embryos. The group that this is going to help the most is going to be women over age 38 or people banking embryos for later and for anyone needing clarity when transfer failed. We do know that people with recurrent pregnancy loss will also benefit from this since they may have a lot of abnormal embryos or even translocations that can be helped by doing PGT so you can put back the healthier embryos. But the most important thing is it helps reduce the emotional toll of repeated disappointment. I wish we had IVF covered in our country, but we don't. But if you are fortunate enough to be able to do PGT, don't let anyone make you feel bad for doing it, and also don't feel like you have to do it. If you're concerned about the embryo being hurt through the biopsy, or concerned about stories you heard about abnormal embryos becoming normal embryos, then don't do PGT. Technically, you know that eventually you will get there by transferring the embryos. It's just it may take a lot longer. On next week's podcast, I'm going to be actually talking about why do these studies say abnormal embryos are linked to live births, and are those studies actually correct? This way I can help clear up some of that concern that some people have. Here's a sneak peek that abnormal embryos were not actually abnormal. I hope this clears things up. PGT is powerful, but it's not a magic wand. It just helps us sort the chocolates. I hope this episode was helpful for you. Maybe you're one of those people who thought PGT made your embryos better, and so maybe this helped you understand that it's more for the sorting than it is to making them better. Well, on the other hand, it's clear that sometimes there are some great benefits of PGT, and that there is no wrong or right decision. If you like this episode, please tell a friend about us. Maybe they're going through this and maybe they think PGT makes their embryos better as well. I know when I've read the forums, I've seen people say that it made their embryos better, which is definitely not true. If you like this podcast and you want to help us grow, please give us a 5-star review on your favorite medium and share this podcast with people you know. But the most important things is to keep coming back. I look forward to talking to you again next week on Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.